Not totally. I was quite strong, especially in my hands, even if I was weedy looking. But you don't stand a chance against 5 of them. And anyway, all I had to do was lift my hands, and after we'd all had our little laugh, it shut them up. For a while, anyway. The name Spacky stuck right through primary school and on to secondary school. That first day at Sir Roger de Coverley Comprehensive wasn't great. It was like walking out in front of a 67,000 crowd at Old Trafford Stadium, except they weren't cheering. They were laughing. Plus, a lot of them had their phones out and they were taking pictures and zapping them off to mates, maybe even all over the world. All these kids I'd never seen before, from primary schools all over town. They all seemed to know. They all seemed to be waiting. They even chanted like a footy crowd. "Sparky! Sparky!" A really bad thing was, girls were doing it too. I liked girls, so that was sad. At primary school it had been mostly blokes. Every day wasn't great. It was like waking up and looking in the mirror and finding a zit the size of a plate on your forehead. A volcano of a pluke with red sides and a yellow hole where the lava's about to spurt out. No, it was worse than that. It was like having 2 volcanoes, fresh and smoking every day. I liked it in winter when it was really cold. Then I could wear gloves. Once the heating in the classroom broke down and I could wear them indoors too. That was brilliant. To have my hands covered up all day for a proper reason. I wore this tracky top all the time, even in summer when it was hot. It had these big pockets in the front that were more like holes where I could bury my hands. It's a funny thing about names. When I came down to London, they didn't call me anything except my real name, Graham. Not counting the things Uncle George and Derek sometimes called me, like Junior Joe, or Joe Strummer, or Charlie Arseface. Had never been to London before, but the name thing made me feel at home straight away. And my real home was the place where they'd called me bad names and pretty much hated me, even my own parents. Dad, anyway. Mum was more complicated. So, here's the background, and then I'll get on to the terrible thing that happened. Me and my mum and dad lived on the outskirts of a medium-sized town in the flat, industrial part of Yorkshire. When I mentioned the place to people in London, they either said they hadn't heard of it, or they thought it was in the Dales, because that's the only bit of Yorkshire they knew. But there were no oldie tea shops round our way. From my bedroom window I could see 2 coal pits and the cooling towers of a power station. These big towers looked like giant mugs of hot coffee, with great clouds of steam rising off them in slow motion. Between the house and the nearest of the coal pits was a motorway and a railway. The railway went to London. Trains screamed along it at night. When I heard them, I would think of all-night gambling. Fat, rich blokes stepping out of a giant hotel into Park Lane and not knowing what time of day it was, or even what day it was, period. Our house was a brick cube on an estate of about 50 or 100 identical brick cubes. The people who lived in them all worked in things to do with railways or power stations or coal pits. They drove company cars like Vauxhall Vetras and wore suits and carried clipboards and kept hard hats and wellies in the boot for site visits. My dad sold cement. His perk was getting free cement to build a rock garden. A huge flatbed lorry turned up just to deliver 1 bag of cement. We had a different front door from everyone else's. It was wood-coloured, with panes of mock old-fashioned glass like the bottom of bottles. Then other houses got different things, like shutters that were only for show, too narrow to cover the windows, and anyway, they were nailed to the wall. And slowly, the houses began to look a bit different from each other. But that didn't fool me. To me, they were always the same. I remember being about 7 and stepping out from the side gate of our house, practically straight into open fields. I was quite happy then. I mean, waking up in the morning wasn't too bad, and I could go for nearly a whole hour during the day without thinking about my hands. I tagged along with other kids on the estate. At school, they were some of the major ones shouting Spacky, etc., but in the holidays they were quite shy and hardly mentioned my hands. We skidded about on our bikes and went down to the railway crossing to watch the express trains scream by to London. Next to the railway crossing was a little stream where we fished for sticklebacks with bright green nets on the end of bamboo poles. We put the fish in old jam jars and took them home, but they never lived more than a few days. I made a fish graveyard at the bottom of the garden. I was just floating through that summer like the dandelion clocks through the fields. But good things, even just okay things, never last. Hey, pay attention. His name is Graham Sinclair. This is his wisdom. I was riding my bike down a lane between two fields when a man came out the bushes and held his hand up. The way he did it reminded me of a traffic cop in a comedy film I once saw set in Italy. He got knocked down by a runaway Fiat. The man who came out the bushes had grey stubble that looked like you could strike a match on it. He said he worked for the Secret Service and was on an undercover mission to spy on some criminals who were operating in the neighbourhood. He said I looked like good Secret Service material. Would I like to join him? I didn't ask for his ID, but he offered me a card anyway. It could have been anything. I was embarrassed to hold it for too long or read it properly in case he noticed my hands and made a comment. I handed it back and said I had to be going. Then he said, "Before you join, you'll have to have a medical, just to make sure you're A1 health-wise." I wasn't daft. Even then, I got back on my bike and rode home. I waited 2 days before telling Mum. I'm not sure why. The police came round. Dad exploded because I'd waited before telling them. Police never found anyone. After that, I wasn't allowed to go out into the fields and play on my own, which wasn't such a big deal as it happened because the open ground and fields would disappear in anyway. So even if I'd been allowed to play in them, they wouldn't have been there because they were being covered by more houses and roads. Even the little stream was covered over. The wood that protected the magical oak tree was cut down, including the magical oak tree, obviously. These old blocks of stone that we said were the gateway to the centre of the earth, carted off on a flatbed lorry. It was like a dream that there had ever been anything around us but more houses. Each house had a spindly little tree in the front garden. The trees were strapped to poles by a piece of green rubber that went grey in the winter and then rotted off. Next to the trees were these manhole covers with big dimples in them that looked like the tray Mum made Yorkshire puddings in. We had roast beef in Yorkshire every Sunday. When it was raining, the windows steamed up and I would be told off for making portholes in the steam to see out of. At night, I listened to the trains going to London, all curled up in what is called the fetal position, with my hands between my knees. When I was 12, at the end of my first year at Sir Roger de Coverley, I made a friend called Brian. We weren't real friends. I knew that even then, and that was 2 years ago. But nobody else would have us, so we just sort of joined up. Brian was big and clumsy and quite rude. Not just to me, but to everyone, which is partly why no one liked him. I know we looked funny together because people used to laugh at us as we went by, even adults sometimes. I must have been 10 centimetres shorter than Brian. Plus I was thin and weedy looking compared to him, except for the hands, of course. There was one thing I was grateful to him for. He never mentioned the hands. I don't think that was because he was kind, though. He just didn't want me mentioning anything to get my own back, like his gigantic feet, or the way he walked on tiptoe, tipped forward on his huge feet, the way loonies do. In the holidays, I would cycle to Brian's house when his mum and dad and older brother were out. We would look at porn mags belonging to his brother, silently, sitting side by side on his brother's bed with Brian turning the pages. One day this spring, he met me in the driveway with his bike. He'd been waiting for me. He said he'd found something secret. I followed him, and he went down near the railway line. It was all built up now. Closes and drives and avenues and boulevards. He took me through a gap in a hedge. "See," he said. It was a ditch, deep and dry. "Let's make a den," he said. He kicked at the sandy soil with his size 10 trainers. "A den," I said. Dens were for childhood, and childhood had gone in case he hadn't noticed. We were reading porn mags now. "We're not kids anymore, Brian," I said. "Not kids, no," Brian said. But you've got secrets, haven't you? And for a split second,